hello. Welcome to PodRocket. My name's Noel. Today I am joined by Arpit Mohan, who is the co-founder and CTO of Appsmith. How's it going, Arpit?
Hi, Noel. Super excited to be here. I'm very well and glad to be talking with you today.
Awesome. Yeah, so I know we can kind of start wherever you think makes the most sense, but just tell us a little bit about you and your background to get us rolling.
Right. I'm a engineer. I'm a software engineer. That's how I end up defining myself. And so I've been working professionally in the industry for about, God, has it been 13 years now? So it's been a little bit of time that I've been around. And for a good part of the previous decade, I've done multiple startups. I've primarily worked in and around startups largely. And this has given me the opportunity to work with a lot of different products, seen a lot of different industries, ranging from AI, fintech, telecom, mobile gaming, and this time around, I'm working on Appsmith, which is a low-code application builder platform. It's an open source project, and with Appsmith, I get the option to work on an open source project, and I get to work on a developer platform for the first time. So, which is super exciting.
Nice. We like dev tools at LogRocket. That's what we're all about. Yeah, so tell us about it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you said it's like an open source app building platform. Is that right?
Yes, it's an open source. I think the industry term now is low code, and
Gotcha.
so it's an open source application building platform. So where users can drag and drop UI elements onto a screen, position them however they wish to, connect them to any API, private or public API, any database that they're running, MySQL, Postgres, whatever, and just simply publish their web app. And it's a great solution to it's a great way to kind of build a lot of the admin panels, dashboards, a lot of custom tools that every product team, every growing team requires just to keep the business and the engines running. And the reason that we kind of started out with AppSmith was by by trade or by education, I'm a distributed systems engineer. So I've spent a lot of time working on, in Java, Golang, Node.js. So while I can manage servers, like lots of servers, I can manage databases. For the life of me, HTML and CSS has always eluded me. That is a skill set that I am not very good at, and that's why we ended up starting appsmith as well, because I believe that there are a lot of other engineers as well who need to be building these dashboards, these panels as well, but they may or may not be as comfortable using bootstrap, react admin, or any other material UI solutions out there. And that's why we ended up building appsmith to ease the pain and make it super simple to get up and running with something like this.
Gotcha. So, just for our listeners, what is the output of AppSmith? Is it web apps? Is it like mobile native stuff? Like what are you building?
Oh, yeah. So once you build an app on AppSmith and you click the deploy button, which is actually going live with it, it's a web app today, uh, and so you can share the link with your team, or anybody else who needs to use the admin panel. So we have authentication or security built in. So the way you invite somebody to a Google Doc is the same way that you would invite somebody to your AppSmith app. So because we deal with a lot of databases or private APIs, so everything in AppSmith is private by default. So by default, only you can ever see your app. Everybody else, even if they have the link, they'll get a 404 because they're not invited to it. Um, and on the flip side, if there is any reason that you wish to publish a web app publicly on the public internet as well, uh, like a Google Doc, you can always make it publicly readable. So that uh, link, or that that web page is then accessible as if you would access any other SaaS application itself.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I think it's a bit of a paradigm shift probably for most like web devs when they think about like building and deploying a little app. is there, let's see. So if I build and deploy an AppSmith app, does that have to go to like infrastructure that you guys are hosting? Is that the default?
No. So we ship a Docker container, which you can run on your own, EC2 instance, Azure VM, etc. That has the entire AppSmith engine running. Uh, and all the apps that you build, you can like literally just do it on your laptop if it's something that you want to do personally, or you can run it inside your VPN or inside your, firewall itself if it's within your team. And so none of these apps are, so while AppSmith has a cloud hosting platform which you can definitely leverage, where we manage and run the entire infrastructure or platform, users can, literally just download one single Docker container and run it on their own system. And all these apps, um, uh, are powered by the AppSmith engine, which is running in the Docker container. And and yeah, and that's how you get all the shareable links. You get all the authentication and uh, other features that are powered by the AppSmith engine.
Gotcha. So what is the AppSmith engine all running? Is that auth layer the primary like server piece? Is most of the other stuff just kind of like a front end web server, or is there other back end stuff that the engine is running?
Yeah. So there's actually a bunch of stuff that's running inside the engine. So when an AppSmith app is built, so there is no HTML or CSS code that or JS code that is generated underneath the hood. So we don't do any sort of code generation. All users are really doing underneath the hood is creating a configuration, large JSON configuration, which the AppSmith engine at runtime infers and then renders the UI, the HTML, CSS that the browser requires. So this translation from the JSON configuration to the HTML, CSS is performed by the AppSmith engine. Uh, and the AppSmith engine, that's obviously one of the primary things that it does. Uh, and then because the engine, it's because we have an engine, it also does a lot of other things, like you said, authentication, security. Uh, if you are making an invocation to an SQL database or a Mongo database, all these DB calls or API calls are not initiated through the browser, through the user's browser or the client browser, because that becomes a security risk. Because if you have to fetch data from an SQL database, you need credentials, and if these credentials get exposed to the client browser, your database is at risk. So all of this is, these credentials are stored privately in the AppSmith engine, and the engine which is running on the server is the one that actually executes the SQL query. So you never have to plug holes in your firewall to expose your database to the public internet. You can literally have it the way you would run any other web app. Is you'd host your container inside your firewall, and all you're really doing is just exposing port 80 or 443 to the public world, and just get access to it.
Nice. What just from as a technical curiosity, like what
Mhm.
language is that kind of handoff logic in, where like like the front end needs to make a query that requires a SQL
Right.
query, for
Uh,
example.
so the front end is completely React. So we
Hmm.
are huge proponents of React. So that's what the entire front end rendering logic is.
Hmm.
That's where that's written in React. The actual query executions, the DB or the API query executions, that is written in Java Spring. So we use the newer version of Reactive Spring, which is called Webflux. So it brings in all uh, the niceties of Node.js, of being non-blocking in nature, of us being able to write reactive code while still leveraging multiple cores, and getting the stability and the scalability that Java provides. Java, by the way, is an absolute beast of a language. So all the stability that Java provides. So yeah. So and the backing database where all this configuration is stored is MongoDB. So MongoDB is our DB of choice. So it's React, Java, and Mongo.
Gotcha. So is Mongo where those kind of those configuration files live that inform how the
Right.
front end gets built, or those are those saved in
Yeah.
Mongo?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Exactly. Exactly.
Gotcha. So um I'm just kind of to kind of paint a more full picture here. Say I have like UI elements that are conditional, like based on the, I don't know, if the user is in North America or like
Hmm.
elsewhere in the world, as an example.
Hmm.
How does the output, I guess, how does that, like say I change some user property, how would
Hmm.
I have that kind of proliferate through the app and change how views are entered? Is that stored in the database ever, or is that just kind of at like render time those decisions are made?
Right. So in AppSmith, everywhere that you can write English, so you can also write JavaScript. So any button, any UI, any table, anything and everything can be configured at runtime via JavaScript conditions. So you can say that Noel sits in North America, so show him like maybe a red and white background, but Arpit sits in Belgium, so show him like a yellow and black background. So you can have this conditionally, as a JavaScript code. You can just write that where you pick the browser location and just determine what the background color is. Um, in addition to that, because we are a developer platform and a developer tool, we also ship with like an entire code mirror editor as well. So with async, await, promises, etc. So you can leverage nearly everything that ES6 provides. So we are, I think, close to kind of supporting the ECMAScript completely. So anything that would be supported in VS Code or modern browsers, you can actually write that entire logic in AppSmith, in the AppSmith editor as well, and you can control just about any property that you wish to control. And so it translates to a much easier way of building a lot of complicated applications where you want different UI elements to show for different users. You might want to hide something for maybe a non-admin user. You might want to control the data itself, um, so on and so forth. So it allows users to rise above like a simple CRUD app. So a simple CRUD app, the first level would be to just be able to do CRUD operations. And by here CRUD, when I say it, I mean create, read, update, delete operations. But you can then go one level up and start building more complicated workflows, and say that because it's all JavaScript on the UI, uh, you can control anything via JavaScript.
Yeah, nice, nice, very cool. We touched on it briefly there, but can you talk a little bit more about like the developer experience? Like, what's this like if you're a dev working on an app built in AppSmith?
uh, so just to clarify, you're asking about a developer building an app on AppSmith?
Yeah, like what's the developer experience like? Like, say, how do I, like
Okay.
say I'm in there, I'm editing how stuff looks or how behavior changes, and I like save it. How do I like work on my AppSmith app?
Right. Okay. So yeah. In order to get up and running with AppSmith, like I said, you just start a Docker container on either your local machine or an EC2 machine, and just go to that IP. Uh, by default, you start. We'll ask you for an admin login. So that's the first login, which is an administrator login, and you're literally just dropped into your first application itself. We have a bunch of templates you can derive from or fork from, but you can also just start with a if you're that kind of an artist who loves the blank page, you can start with that. The first thing that we've seen a lot of users do is drag and drop UI elements to get your UI, or get a skeleton of the UI where you want a table in a certain place, a button on the top, a text field on the top, so on and so forth. Uh, the next thing that you would probably do is connect this AppSmith instance to your database or to your REST API. Uh, and that involves just feeding in your SQL credentials, your Mongo credentials, or your API. If you have a private API, maybe some header parameters, so on and so forth. um, and by and it's a very postman like experience. So for the API, for Mongo, again, it's a very consistent sort of very you can write raw SQL queries, and you can again control the query, how you're constructing it, because uh, like I said, because AppSmith allows you to write JavaScript wherever you can write English. you can also intersperse JavaScript inside your SQL query. So I can say, select star from users where ID equal to, and then I can have a conditional, JavaScript conditional, which says, if user in North America, ID, return one, else return two. So you can conditionally return different data, and that's like a big superpower, because at runtime, the JavaScript engine, the AppSmith engine will translate this to a valid SQL query and then execute it, send it to your database.
Gotcha. So
Uh,
you said the backend isn't running JavaScript though, right? So like, is that JS executed on the client? The client sends up a value to the server. The server puts
yeah,
that value into the SQL query. Is that what ends up
yes,
happening?
exactly.
Gotcha.
That's absolutely perfectly it, because so at runtime the browser client only sends the evaluated values, like the browser evaluates what the JavaScript would value would be, return value would be, and just sends it to the server and says, there were three parameters in this function. Uh, Parameter one is this, two is this, three is this, and the server knows which function you're talking about. So the function itself is never exposed to the client browser again. So again, the as an end user, or as a random user, you will never see what the SQL query is, or you'll just know that a query of ID 123 was asked to be executed with parameters, P1, P2, P3. And so the server is the one that just puts it all together, replaces whatever needs to be replaced, sanitizes everything, ensures there's no XSS or anything funny happening, and then sends it to your database for execution.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. I guess is there any I'm considering the security like implications of this. So say I'm like a developer and I'm setting up logic like this where I like am returning records to a user based on the output of one of those JavaScript queries, right? So I say like show me the I don't know, like the records where the user ID is bleh. Like is the current user ID, is that like would that be exploitable by the front end, because someone could go in and like modify what value ends up getting sent up there, and how do you solve that problem?
Right. So as a as an end user, so in the deployed mode of the application, so in the deployed mode, the uh, the JavaScript query itself, again, because it's just executed by by the AppSmith engine running on the renderer engine, if you will, on the browser client. So there is no explicit uh, JavaScript that you can see in the, you go to your sources or you look at the JavaScript console or etc. You'll actually never see any of this JavaScript, because it was all part of like one big JSON configuration that came at the beginning, and which the renderer engine parsed. um, so as an end user, there is like nearly zero chances that this JavaScript can be modified. I mean, you can't modify it, rather, unless it's returned by the server itself. So at runtime, you can't modify this JavaScript. You can't modify what it evaluates to. You can literally just in the worst case, you can open the network console and you can see that, oh, these are the three outputs of a couple of things that I did. So that's pretty much what you can do, but you can't really modify it or do anything to it.
I guess so. What's preventing, again? Say like maybe there's a simple use case for this, but say someone designs an app where like the user ID is being passed up in the request and then used in a SQL query upstream to fetch records back. Like, what's stopping me from modifying the request? Or I see the request go through with my user ID two, and I'm like, I want to see what's user ID three's got. I modify the network request, put a three in there, and send it up to the engine again. Does that
Right.
work, or is there some mechanism that's preventing that from happening?
So technically, yes, it'll end up working. Like if you literally copy the network console and you curl uh, you execute a curl with different parameters. So in your terminal or in Postman or whatever. So you can technically change what the server is executing. And a couple of things that we recommend to app developers to ensure that this does not happen is, a, obviously, ensure that you are either, if the data is very sensitive or etc., then you ensure that the app is not accessible itself to outside your team. So share it with people that that actually need to use the app, and don't make it necessarily publicly available. That's one. The other is we also have, you can add checks where uh, you can say that, so we also expose the AppSmith user object. So you can compare maybe the email ID with the ID itself. So you can have a check. So even if you pass an ID to, or you change any one of the function parameters and you say, oh, you know what, instead of ID1, let's pass ID2. Uh, you know, in your SQL query itself, you can, have like a check which says, oh, the email ID should match with, or you can have a condition over there. You can add some of these conditions that the user cannot modify
Gotcha.
because it comes from your session, it comes from your login
It's
itself.
in the back. It's on the back end. Like it's
It's
saved.
on the, it's, yeah, so you're deriving it from uh like from a session variable, or you're deriving it from there. So it's possible for you to ensure that that does not happen.
Gotcha.
And the third thing that we recommend people is to or people, users who have a much higher security barrier. If you're a fintech company, or if you're a health tech company, etc., is to secure the API or the database through JWT, or through an OAuth 2 token itself, which AppSmith will transparently sort of pass. So that token will never be exposed to the client. It's just stamped on by the server before it is sent out. So a lot of fintech or health tech teams end up using OAuth 2 or JWT tokens for stamping with the user's login token, and that's how they verify, are you allowed to execute this query, and they have like a couple of checks and balances at their end as well before the query actually gets executed in their database, or their GraphQL, or their API servers.
Gotcha. That makes sense to me. So in that kind of that third step there of like using a token of some kind, is that paired with the second case of like then in the app server, like when I'm building the SQL queries and I reference the user object, like is that just kind of building on that notion, or is there some other step that I'm missing where like that token ends up getting sent all the way to the client and then back up to the server? Because I would think you'd still need like if the AppSmith app is what's in charge of filter, like instructing how to write a SQL query, it's still going to need to know that this user is actually authenticated to make a query of this form. Does that make sense?
So yeah, so AppSmith is uh, basically executing any query that you've written as a user. So if you end up writing, let's say, a query without a where clause, or without, that doesn't take any parameters, AppSmith will just blindly execute it. So as a developer, you still have to, because it's a developer platform, AppSmith gives some guardrails, uh, but if you don't, as a developer, if you don't follow some of these dev practices around, am I writing the right query, am I opening myself up to SQL injection, by default AppSmith uses prepared statements, but you have the option to turn it off. So, but if you're turning it off, you're opening yourself up to SQL injection, so on and so forth. So that's one aspect of it. So as a developer, you still have to, you build an app the way you would build any other web app, a Rails or a Node.js app that you were building anyways. To your second point, the AppSmith user object has a bunch of details. Your name, your login name, your email ID, etc. So on and so forth. There are a few things that the server also stores against your login session. The JWT or the ID token being one of them, and querying or using or stamping that ID token or sending that along with your query is just a matter of just using the dollar AppSmith ID token. Uh, that's all that you really need to put in somewhere in your query. The moment the AppSmith server sees this keyword, this environment variable, it just substitutes it with the user's ID token and then just sends it out. So you can use it in a REST API header. You can use it in your SQL query itself. You can use it anywhere and everywhere. Um, it's just that that ID token is never exposed to the client. So the client will only ever see a dollar AppSmith ID token. That's all that, even including an end user. End user will also never be able to modify this.
Gotcha. Yeah, that I guess yeah. Having a kind of user ID object that's only modifiable and accessible by the server, I think, kind of answers that um,
Yeah,
like authentication question that
yeah,
I was chewing on a little bit there. Cool.
right.
That makes sense to me. So then I guess my only other kind of big question on this front of like querying data and stuff is, could you guide me, like walk me through an example of, say I had like a button that I wanted to, like a user clicks this button, it increments like a global counter that everyone sees, like everyone's watching for updates on this. How would I wire something like that up?
Uh, Great question. This is not something AppSmith supports yet. This is on our roadmap, where sort of basically doing WebSockets, where you publish some data and other users on that page automatically see the updated information. As of today, you would do it maybe like with a web app where you would store the incremented counter in your, you know, SQL, Redis, wherever else in some backend database. And on refresh, every user will see the updated value. So everybody is pulling the data. The server doesn't push anything the way you would do a server side event or a WebSocket for that matter.
Gotcha. Could you set
This
up
is
like
on our roadmap.
polling or something like every 10 seconds? Like,
Oh
is
yeah,
that
that
possible?
that you can do. That you can do.
Gotcha.
You can set because JavaScript, full browser JS is available. You can just say set interval and call the the
Yeah.
function again, the query again, and
Hmm.
that will just keep. So a couple of people set up their televisions or with the monitoring systems and dashboards.
Hmm.
So they just put it up on the television with a set interval of 5 minutes. So the
Cool.
dashboard just keeps getting refreshed. So you're just polling for new data.
Nice. What have this is kind of changing gears a bit here, but like, what have some of the challenges that you guys have faced around building a, a platform kind of built on open source? Has that been difficult in any respect?
Um, I would say it's been different because traditionally, historically, I've almost always exclusively worked on closed source projects, and shifting gears to building an open source project, building in the open, building in public, that was something that I had to learn, unlearn some of the previous practices, learn new ones, and I think the biggest one for me was. Whenever we work on any closed source project or a closed source product, we keep everything very, very secret. And at the code, our issues, our bugs, future enhancements, so on and so forth, right? And opening this up to the entire world to see at first felt like people will know all the bugs we have, people will know how crappy our code is, or so there's always this vulnerability that you're exposing yourself to the entire world, and that was something that took at least me personally a while to kind of get over that hump. But over a period of time, I came to realize that building in public is one of the best things that we did because the open source community and the community at AppSmith that we've ended up building has been uh, incredible. People have been very forgiving of our mistakes. We've obviously made mistakes in our engineering, in our product decisions, and people have been very forgiving of our mistakes and actually shown us better ways to do stuff. You know, whenever we made a mistake, people are like, "Oh, you know what? It happens. Just learn from this. Move on from here." Uh, in addition to that, they've contributed a lot towards ideas about where they would like to see the product move, the direction that they would move in. So we get a lot of product insights from the community, uh, and uh, and yeah, and largely overall, just our code got better. Like when we open sourced everything, our code just automatically got better because a little part inside us, that little that lizard engineer, as I would call it, that vulnerability. Like you want to write test cases. You want to ensure that when we if your name is out there publicly attached to this code base, it better be the best thing that you've written. because all your future roles, everybody, you're going to look back and see that, hey, I wrote that code. And so our test coverage became better, our design decisions became better, just because we had to do it in the open.
Gotcha. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Very cool. Yeah. Um, who have been like the uh, most common users for like AppSmith? Like what kinds of apps do you see people writing?
Right. So we see a lot of, I mean, one of the most common use cases, if you will, or the apps that we see are things like customer support dashboard, something that connects to Zendesk to pull your tickets, and then connects to your orders database as well and your user database as well, and shows it all in a single screen. So a customer support dashboard like that with some workflows here and there, user management systems, especially KYC or know your customer systems, where users need to be approved or their plans need to be changed, so on and so forth. So a user management system. Uh, so these are a couple of like some of the most popular use cases. Uh, Although we have a very broad sort of usage, people host us on Raspberry Pi right up to like clusters of servers on EC2. While we have a very broad range, I think the sweet spot for us has always been, SaaS companies or products that have a lot of operations, overheads or operations or large operations teams, because that's when you need to build a lot of admin panels, a lot of tools just to keep the entire operations team on the single page and running together.
Gotcha. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, like internal tools like that seem like a pretty logical use case. Like you have these like,
Yeah.
technical people, but they don't want to like spin up and maintain another web app. Like, okay, we can find something that does some of that lifting for us on the front end, point it to the back ends, let people manage their data.
Exactly.
Nice, awesome, awesome. Yeah, what are your guys' kind of what are the plans for? We talked a little bit about like potential features. So what are your guys' kind of big next steps? What are you working on now at Swift?
Right. Over the next few quarters or over the next year, if I will, um, one of the things that we are obviously sort of focusing on very heavily is is on stability and improving the performance of the apps that are built. So by default, we want apps to be faster, and we want it to be more stable, so that people can start relying on AppSmith a lot more and a lot more confidently. So stability and performance is definitely one of the big areas that we're working on. The A couple of the other areas that we're working on is improving our mobile responsiveness. Today, AppSmith is largely geared for desktop web, uh, but not really for mobile web or native mobile. So that's another big push that we are making in that particular direction. Um, and the third is supporting a lot more use cases around being able to handle larger amounts of data, so that there are a lot of users who want to do uh, so there are a lot of users between basic charting and a BI system like Tableau. So but there's a big gap between these use cases. So we want to support more users who want to do a bunch of stuff around you know handling and modifying this data within AppSmith.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, are there any uh, like are there any components of AppSmith that are not open source that you guys have been like struggling or you're thinking about open sourcing or vice versa, like that are open source now that you're thinking about closing?
No, definitely, this is a commitment we made to ourselves and to the community that if we've open sourced something, we won't close it again. So open sourcing something or anything for that matter is a very, a thought out decision for us. So one of the things that the closed source things that we do at AppSmith is, so we have a commercial or a paid edition as well. So which builds on top of the community edition and comes with additional security, audit logs, multi-factor authentication, so on and so forth. So that code base is, or those plugins or those extension points are closed source. As of right now, we are not really going to open source that. That's not on the cards. There are a couple of things though that I would like to spin out of AppSmith. from the Appsmith code base and publish it just as a library, like a separate library. I think the biggest one for me was a curl parser in Java. Like I just for the life of me couldn't find a good curl parser, and we ended up writing one in Java for ourselves. So that's something right now it's like embedded. I mean, it's inside a class file somewhere in the code base, but I would love to kind of just take it out as publish it as a separate, you know, library or SDK, which everybody can use. Uh,
Nice. That makes sense. Cool. Yeah, I think I've got a pretty good handle then. Yeah, in our I guess yeah, for context for everyone listening, in our preparation for this podcast as well, yeah, Arpit came and he like we're talking a little bit about managing microservices as well. Is that an area you've
Mhm.
been thinking about a lot recently?
So Appsmith is the first monolithic system I've ever worked at. So till date, I've almost always worked on microservices and web scale systems. So in one of my previous roles, I was working on leading the team to design and deploy a system that did 30 million transactions a day. It was a telecom system. So I've almost always operated in such distributed systems. But coming to AppSmith, uh, we kind of made everything monolithic, and this was a complete, 180 degree turn from what I usually do, and a couple of reasons for that. The first is, having microservices would mean that as a user of AppSmith or a developer on top of AppSmith, you'd then have to just the maintenance overhead of any distributed systems is multifold. So just having two services or three services does not mean it's thrice the effort. I think it's 8 times the effort to just to get ensure that everything is running, nothing is dying on you, so on and so forth. So that's the first. We wanted the install experience, the maintenance experience for AppSmith in self-hosted scenarios to be very, very simple. So that's why we made it monolithic. The other one was for purely for performance reasons. So if I do not have to, go over the network, I don't have to, talk to like 5 different services in order to accumulate the data that the user needs. By default, we'll be a little more performant, a little more snappier for the user. And uh, and the last bit was just ease of, I would say, just the ease of deploying. Uh, so while we support Kubernetes and we support other installation targets, and we also support clustering as well. Like if you actually reach a scale where you need to cluster, AppSmith can be clustered, and we help users do that as well. That's something that we don't generally recommend as like the first use case. We expect people, or we tell users that get to a point where you have about 200 250 odd users on your 4 GB instance, and then let's talk about scaling, because anything below that, it just makes no sense for users, whether it's AppSmith users or just normal web app or SaaS developers, to actually worry about a distributed system like one single Java jar or one single like Golang binary or whatever it is, Node.js, on a 4 GB or 8 GB machine, uh, written correctly, will go a very, very long way. So I'm generally of the opinion that, at least for startups, like find there are a lot of 20 problems that you probably have when you start doing a product. Distributed systems shouldn't be one of them.
Yeah, gotcha. I think a lot of people have kind of you know marched into that camp over the last 5 or so years. Like that seems to be a trend. Is that would you agree?
Um, I'm not so sure I agree with that, because looking at the popularity of Kubernetes, so Kubernetes being an absolute beast of a product, like like a lot of respect for the product and the developers, etc. But at the end of the day, it's really complicated. It's complex. It's complex to maintain that cluster, to run the cluster, etc. And the number of people who've started to use Kubernetes for running their blogs, for running the first MVP of their startup product, or the SaaS product, has always amazed me. That why are you wrangling your head around Kubernetes and its configurations? When you're not at that scale, like it's really really relevant if you are at a Google scale. But if you're not Google scale, or you're not even planning to get there anytime soon, there's no reason for using Kubernetes. And that's why I feel that I'm not so sure I agree with you, but me But maybe that's just a bias because I'm just seeing the other side of this coin where I see a lot of people just saying, "Hey, I want to use Kubernetes. I want to learn Kubernetes." And my first question to them is why? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think do you find usage like the usage of Kubernetes in your head, is that synonymous with microservices?
um, I would say that if yes, I would say yes because if you're using Kubernetes to run a single pod, then I mean it's just like why are you even
Why?
doing that?
Right. Sure.
Unless you're running like multiple pods, you're trying to scale out your pods, you're running five services on it. I don't think it makes a lot of sense for you to even you know be running on Kubernetes. You shouldn't be touching that product
Hmm.
at all. That product's not for you. All you should
Gotcha.
maybe be worried about is just you know scping or rsyncing your binary to your server and just restarting your server.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'd always assumed, I don't really have any data to back this up, but I had the impression that there were people who were using Kubernetes for like their small to mid-sized projects, where they would never even argue that they really have like a microservices architecture, but they're using it for like, auto scaling and ensuring that like, and my database is here, and like they're just using it for the like orchestration piece of managing like a much more like centralized monolithic app that maybe is like kind of starting to auto need a little bit of auto scaling and stuff like that. Do you think that that is not very common?
Uh, yeah, actually, I would say that I have seen quite a few people. In fact, Appsmith supports Kubernetes as an installation target, and that's pretty much what we do. We don't really break it out into five different pieces. It's just we auto scale it out and we scale it back in if required. So yeah, so a lot of people just use it for cluster management or just uh, cluster scheduling, which I think is fine. Uh, there itself, again, I personally, but maybe this is just me coming in from, because I knew a world before Kubernetes, so maybe I'm just comfortable with that world, and I haven't become as comfortable yet with Kubernetes. Uh, the same thing can happen with with Amazon's autoscale or any cloud provider's autoscale. By clicking a button and not worrying about too many configurations that need to go in. Um, yeah, so because with Kubernetes, again, you're just running those five nodes, whether you have one pod or you have 20 pods, uh, you have like these five EC2 instances that are running your EKS cluster or your Kubernetes cluster. And in case you need to scale down your EC2 instances or scale down your nodes, now you're doing two levels of autoscale, where you're not just scaling your actual hardware infra, you're also so you're doing two levels of scale, which I think just overcomplicates the problem. For the longest time, I would, again, to a lot of startup teams, my advice, I generally recommend that, just deal with the simplest thing that you can, or do the fastest, quickest, simplest thing that you understand and can do. Maybe with more newer age developers, or maybe somebody who's just gotten into the industry and they've been introduced to Kubernetes, for them, EC2's autoscale would be like, oh my god, like this is what is this? I know how to do a kubectl command. I don't know what EC2's autoscale is, and I totally understand that opinion. It's just that I believe the other way around.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. Yeah, yeah, I think that there's yeah, we're kind of on the periphery of a couple different topics here. One is like
Yeah,
microservices, managing them in and of themselves versus like what is the correct level of abstraction in tooling like cloud infrastructure. Like are kind of
right.
they're very tightly coupled conversations, but they are kind of like
Hmm.
they're kind of different things.
Oh,
A little bit
definitely,
as well. Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. So yeah, I think I agree that like a lot of people do end up over tooling their simple apps, and I think the thing I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious about, and I feel like there's still a large diversity of opinions, which I find interesting, is like what is the correct stage of an app where you should be like, let's just like do the overhead work to get this built on top of Kubernetes, even if it's still like a monolith right now. Like we have a database server, an app server, and maybe like one or two other managed services. We'll just we'll set them up with Kubernetes, and then we can like deploy it everywhere. And I feel like a lot of devs are in that camp. Well, let's just do it that way so we can like so we're set up versus let's
Hmm.
not worry about that problem right away. Um, Yeah, so I'm. It's interesting to hear an
Yeah,
opinion, and I think I agree. Like, now, just like use the hosting provider's thing, like as long as you can,
yeah,
it'll
yeah.
be fine.
Yeah, it's just build versus buy. Like just use whatever. Amazon doesn't charge you extra for auto scale, so just do that. And yeah, in general, just use whatever is the simplest thing you know how to use. So so if you are comfortable with Ansible, then just go with Ansible or Chef or Puppet or whatever it is.
Nice. Nice. Where
Yeah.
do you what trends do you expect to kind of continue happening in this domain? Do you think devs will keep reaching for tools like Kubernetes and like these highly configurable complex tools, or do you find more and more? Do you think you see more and more people reaching for the off the shelf tooling that is simpler to configure?
I think there will always be a trend towards simplification. That's what I, or higher abstraction level. So Amazon came in and abstracted the hardware away. Kubernetes came in and starts to abstract Amazon away, or the virtual machines itself. Uh, I think some other service or some other abstraction layer is waiting to be built, which just abstracts Kubernetes away, and Kubernetes then uh, becomes the de facto platform that everybody uses. The way Amazon just uses KVM or hypervisors under the underneath the hood, and nobody really cares about it. Similarly, I think there's an abstraction level that's waiting to be built. Heroku was doing a great job, or Heroku is still doing like a great job at that layer, where I just want to do a git push, just do it for me. Don't worry, don't bother me too much about it. Uh, and I think the other cloud providers, Amazon or Azure or etc., are just trying to catch up to that experience that Heroku provided 10 years ago. So I think Heroku did that 10 years ago. Then there was a move towards complexity. I think the next decade will be defined by simplicity, because we've gone the Kubernetes way, and now we're just gonna build that next layer of simplicity again.
Awesome, awesome, cool. Well, yeah, we're running a little bit low on time here. I want to make sure. Is there anything else you want to plug, or you want to talk about quick? Send the listeners to.
Um, No, nothing apart from definitely check out Appsmith on GitHub. So that's we are a great community. We're a great repository. We're always looking for contributors. So yeah, apart from that, not really much else.
Nice, nice. Yeah, we'll get a link in the show notes as well, just so
Oh,
everybody's got
thank
one.
you.
Cool, cool. Well, yeah, thank you for taking some time to chat with me here, Arpit. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Noel. It was an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, of course.